doll, that sort of thing. With however many people.
Oh, geez. Well, we're here. We're back. Shorter commitment tonight. About an hour long. So we'll stay on for an hour tonight.
But it's been a minute though.
It has been a minute. We're making appearances. You know, when people show up to a party late and then leave early, that's what we're doing right now.
It's we how are you anyway? Are you good? Are you you're still here? So that's good.
I'm still here. I've been I've been going through. So there's a lot of things happening, like back to back that I'm having to deal with as a parent. One of which is God, I always hate. This is the part of parenting that I really hate talking about, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Here we are, 1 minute in. How do you say your child is gifted without sounding like a pompous ass?
I think that's a perfect acceptable thing to say. I think we all think our children are gifted, and to be either recognizing and most of them are one way or another, whether that be your perception or an actual fact. I mean, what is gifted in the grand scheme of things? I think it's perfect thing to say.
I think so. I mean, we've had multiple third-party opinions on this too. Like my kid is 4 years old. His interests include. Let me remind you, he's 4 years old. His interests include biology, geography, algebra, anatomy, astrophysics.
Okay. Yeah, you're hitting new levels there. That's fair.
He is 4 years old, and I'm not joking. Those are his interests.
Cool. So how does he express those interests? How do they manifest?
They manifest in so another thing that is sort of special about him is he's already reading and writing, and we have given him moderated access to YouTube Kids. And what his interests manifest in are him searching things like gallbladder song. And so like we were out having dinner the other night, and he goes, "Oh, this is smooth like your gallbladder." And I'm like, "What's your stop. So all that to say, the thing that we've been going through over here is sort of the process of getting him geared up for, it's like early admittance to kindergarten. Although it's like he was born like 1 month after the deadline, but they have a window in which you can advance them and get them in if they, are 6 months beyond their sort of peers. And so my wife and I have been kind of pursuing this process to see if we can get him into kindergarten next year. And with that, there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. There's several papers that you need to sign. There's several documents that you need to get a hold of. There are several third-party assessments that need to occur. And so it's been a whirlwind of like trying to make sure that we have all the papers in the right place at the right time. Tomorrow we're going to get him assessed to see if his placement will be accepted. And so it's just it's been a lot.
Yeah.
It's been a lot.
Quite stressful, I should imagine.
Yeah, there's that. And then there's, we're taking a vacation towards the end of the month. And so we're having to prepare documentation for that. And Uh, and then there's work, and that's busy, and then there's gearing up for HFES again. Yeah,
of course, yes, it's
tis the
moving
season
in that
almost.
direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
So the initial conversations have begun. Um,
cool.
that that
Where
will
is this?
happen this year. It'll be in Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh, cool. Oh, hot actually, isn't it? Out that way.
Very hot. Yeah, in October, September. Is it September this year? I feel like it's September this year. I should know this.
Well, but by then we'll have a whole new government.
Yeah, yeah, you will. Hey, that was a great. We will too. Wait, no, September, October, November. No, we'll be close to having a brand new government.
You'll be talking about it. We'll have worked out whether we can stay your friends or not.
Yeah,
depending on who you choose, and we've got a few months to try and because I quite like that American system of you vote in the next president, and then you've got this kind of you've got that time allow it to ramp up and do. Whereas here in the UK, it's literally, polls close at 10 o'clock. You get a result at some point. So say that's like, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning. By 10 o'clock the next day, the next prime minister's walking in through the door at number 10.
Yeah, well, the danger here in the States is that, of course, if somebody doesn't want to go, then they stage an insurrection, and then
that would never happen. Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
No,
so that's a couple good things that we can talk about, because there's a variety of ways in which we can go tonight. You brought up elections, and I love this topic here because we had brought this up. Somebody in one of our live shows a couple weeks ago actually asked about areas in which human factors can improve that isn't really being sort of tackled by human factors right now.
Yeah.
A few of these areas were law and government, or specifically with electing people to government, or processes within the government. So both of those are great topics that we could talk about tonight. There's been sort of it's been a while since we talked, but one of the things that has happened since we last talked is there was a pretty high profile case here in the States, in the state of New York, where a convicted felon is now awaiting sentencing. And this I got very little work done that week because I was so engrossed with or I guess that week of leading up to jury deliberations. I was following it pretty closely, and I learned a lot. You learn a lot about these things when you start to poke around and see, so I've been seeing what some of the laws are around courtroom, and what types of processes they have, with the jury instruction. I had a whole swath of things that I wanted to talk about with this, but not giving the jury written jury instructions is weird and not human factors-y. And it's why would you? Because they came out and they were reread them to us because we need to hear them again. And I get why you might want to exclude parts of it, but specific instruction, I feel like that should just be. And is that a state of New York thing? Is that a states' rights thing? It's very confusing. And then there's also some other things that are just from a criminal justice perspective, the former president was he had his probation meeting, and he was afforded luxuries that not everyone gets, right? And it's and those luxuries being having your attorney present during that process, and also conducting it via Zoom, and not having those be extended to everyone is just kind of one of those things where it's this process should apply to everyone. Anyway, there's a lot of really fascinating things, but that's one thing that I wanted to bring up.
I mean, let's dig into that in a little way, because we were talking about this the other day around. There's the element of justice being done, justice being seen to be done, but there's also that element of what are the wider impacts? So obviously, from a human factors perspective, we want to have the wider. We don't just look at the one person. We try and look at the wider environment, the wider community. And it was interesting when we were chatting about it that yes, they should be treated like any other criminal. There should be, just because you've got a shed load of money or you're a former president, that really shouldn't make any odds. And we talked about in particular of like if he gets jail time, would he go to the same jail as everybody else? Well, no, he's not going to, is he? Because for two reasons. One is he himself would still need, the amount of protection he would need within prison would be insane. And how hard on Secret Service agents to go and have to sleep in the cell next door and do all that. It would be a really weird. I mean, if he tried to escape, where do the Secret Service duties lie? In protecting him whilst he escapes? Or anyway, that I don't think there's much chance of him doing that. But the interesting conflicts that would arise. But then also around the rest of the prison itself. How much would the rest of the prison be upended because of this one inmate? So so that there's a whole bunch of reasons that way that it works, and it's the fact that I think he obviously uses the whole system as a bandstand, and so nobody else can do that. Nobody else has that presence of mind because they it will affect them way more than it'll affect him. But imagine the message it would send if they did actually give him some serious jail time. That would be impressive. Whether they could do it or not, or whether they would have the desire to do that is a different matter.
Yeah.
But
this ties very closely into government, and maybe this is a good segue. But I mean, it does tie very closely into government because he's running for president again, and
the mechanics of that would be really
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
So firstly, because the American system is different from the UK system here, I believe. Yeah, so you can't be an MP whilst you're a convicted felon. Once your conviction is spent, that's something else. But if you're convicted and serving a sentence, so that could be a prison sentence, or it could be on a community order, that on a tag at home, that type of thing. You're not allowed to stand for office. So fine, okay, that's how we wouldn't, where we're at now, Trump would not be allowed to stand in the UK because he's a convicted felon, not spent his conviction. But from the US perspective, you obviously can. So that means should he go to jail, then there is all the campaigning that could be done. How does that facilitate? How do you make sure that from a democratic perspective, the electors have the same access and visibility as they do any other candidate? How would you run the hustings events, the debates and things like that? It would all be, and this is where I find this sort of stuff fascinating and brilliant, because it's all new. Everybody's going, hold on, no, we've not done this before. We are treading new ground. So that, I think, is actually a fascinating part of it. And then you get into, okay, say he is elected, or he gets a massive sympathy vote. He's elected too. How do you run the government from a jail cell? Would he then have the ability to pardon himself? Which I think has been looked at before, and I don't think he does.
He can't, because it's a state felony.
It's not a federal thing. Yeah.
If it was a federal, he would be able to. And there's some interesting things also with that, is that he can't visit certain countries as a convicted felon.
Yeah, and that doesn't matter whether you've spent your thing or not. Once you've got that, so he's not allowed to visit the UK anymore.
Right. So it's like, how do you conduct business? It's like the thing that I find fascinating is that we, as a country, when we wrote the Constitution and wrote out the requirements for who can be president, we never thought that somebody with the title convicted felon would ever be in the position of running for it, and that the American populace would not be would not vote. They would not vote for somebody like that.
So, so,
and that's fascinating.
so looking at that now, then, so we have now learned something new, that somebody with enough power, enough money, can do what has happened. Is that enough to look at another amendment to your constitution? To have, so would there be is there a potential drive there to say, right, let's amend it to say that the president cannot, no, if you want to stand for president, you cannot be a convicted felon or something like that? Because do we think do we think democracy is sufficiently at risk? I mean, because the flip side is true. I mean, it's not all just on Trump, is it? Because actually, Hunter Biden has been convicted of was it the buying a gun
when he was on drugs or something? Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, he's not the president. He's the president's son. So that I should imagine that President Biden is now under a certain amount of pressure. Because we've never had this situation before, where you've got the child of a president is a convicted felon around gun crime, gun and drug crime. I mean, that's not the best message, is it? So it's slight, but so both sides of this has got this level of criminality that has never been around before. Certainly in the modern day. So. Is this something where as good human factors people, we should look back on this and go, things happened here. We should learn from this. What are the changes that we need to enact?
Yeah, and that's a great idea. And the reason I say it's a great idea is because democracy is broken in many ways right now. One of which being half of the government is running an obstructionist type of approach, where there's no good faith. It's just to obstruct the other side from performing the things that they want to do on their agenda. Even if it's well, no, even if it's bipartisan, like the thing is that they're not truly representing the people that they say they are going to. There's an argument to be made that there have been bipartisan bills that have high levels of support.
Mm-hmm.
Like 75% of the country agrees with them. But the obstructionist wing of the government will not pass those things because it is seen as a win for the other side.
Yeah.
Even though it is in the best interest for their constituents, it is not in their best interest politically. So there's some reasons why government is broken, and because of that obstructionist perspective and division and polarization happening. I'm trying to speak about this as non-biased as I can, although my bias is certainly creeping. My bias is creeping through here. There's, it's unlikely that we will pass a constitutional amendment to address some of these issues that we're talking about.
Absolutely,
because of the obstructionist perspective.
So let's treat this as a bit of a mini investigation then. If the way that the government is acting at the moment, in terms of basically both sides are not, I think we always like to think historically that perhaps politicians have acted in the best interest no matter what side they're on. They've just got a different viewpoint. What you're suggesting now is actually one side is just saying no. No matter what you say, we're just going to say no. We don't care. We're just saying no. Where does the blame for that lie? Because does it lie with the people who've been elected, or does it lie with the people who elected them? Because that's what democracy is about. You put your cross in the or you press your button on your machine in the States to do your thing. That what they're doing is what you could argue is what the people have voted for. So
I disagree with that.
Okay, cool.
So here's the argument against that. Yes, we pull the lever, we vote for them, but every factor leading up to that decision has been influenced by a variety of different things. There have been primaries that may have been tampered with by so for example, we have a two-party system. But I would say there's kind of like on the left side you have sort of the progressives and then the moderates, and then on the right side you have sort of the moderates and the radical right, where the primaries that we have here to select who ends up in the head to head in most cases. Some of them are like jungle primaries, which this is where it gets really difficult to talk about this at a general level, because there's not one way that everybody does something. Some states are one way, some states are another way. But in general, there's sort of the primaries kind of vote for whether or not you want that progressive or the moderate, or the far right and the moderate. And what happens is there's sort of this makeup of a district that if let's say some folks from this side come over here and say, oh, we're going to elect the far right person because we know they stand less of a chance than either one of our candidates than the moderate does. The moderate would pose a bigger threat. Then they might jump ship from that primary, come over here, vote for one, and interfere that way. And the same is true for the other way, too. I bring this up because those types of primary decisions will impact the lineup between, who gets elected, and especially in swing states, that's that you can't put the blame on the people, because one, there can be some sort of tinkering behind the scenes there. The other things that are not immediately apparent is that there's lobbyists who, after the people have pulled their lever, so to speak, there are lobbyists pulling the funding button that say, if you vote for this, we'll fund you. And so some of the proposals to break, to unbreak what is broken about democracy have been sort of getting more and more people that represent us in terms of trying to be pure of outside influence and truly are there to serve the people. And then once that happens, that there's going to be a slow, gradual call to enact bills that will sort of cut off those capabilities for like large donations from corporations or lobbyists to interact with them. And because they're isolated from all that, then the idea is that they would act more in good faith to service the people that they represent. There's a whole process for how this might happen in various ways. Government is broken, and I think a lot of people understand that. There's and so we kind of have to vote with whichever direction we want it to go versus like what specifically we want to happen. So as human factors people, what we can do is we can sort of craft the messages that it's almost like marketing in a way. We can craft the messages for these types of bills to help unfuck democracy in a lot of ways. We can craft the message. We can craft some of the specifics. We can impact law by getting involved in like the requirements piece or the law writing. I would be very curious to see what representation we have from a human factors perspective in terms of actually writing law, because that would be a hugely impactful thing that we can do in our field, especially when it comes to putting blame on the individual versus a corporation, and who's, like all this. I'm talking very broadly right now, because you think about Like there's that do you see that Black Mirror episode with the terms of service? Yeah, everyone clicks on the terms of service, and
No, not
then
yet.
they see their faces in AI generated episodes on Netflix.
Okay, no, I haven't seen them yet. No.
So the idea is that everyone hits that except terms of service, and in that terms of service they say we can use your likeness and
Yeah.
events in your real life to write a television show based on those things. And because they're always listening through your phone, they can basically infer what's happening, and then they go and write a whole TV episode about your life, and then put it up on Netflix, and everyone gets to see it. Where we come in as human factors people can say, okay, well, we can impact how terms of services can be written and how they're communicated. We can come in and say, how is this being messaged to people? And so there's a lot of different points in which we can come in and kind of help with law, I feel, which is all kind of full circle to what we started talking about. But
yes,
yeah,
it's so obviously here in the UK as well, we're having our general election. Ours is a bit closer, we've three weeks left to go, and it's really interesting as well seeing people's. So there's so many people now saying, we don't need any more general election period. Let's just vote tomorrow. We know how we're going to vote. It's an interesting one at the moment that. Because nobody believes in polls unless the polls are running your way, obviously. But the polls, normally when you get towards an election, the polls normally narrow. When everybody starts getting, oh, well, I'm not entirely sure, or, start getting cold feet and all that sort of polls narrow. That's not really happening. If anything, the Labour is sort of wingling around within 3% of kind of where it's been. The Conservatives are actually going away from this, and there's some interesting third-party action going on. Which is something I've not seen before. But fundamentally now, everybody's, all the political activists are out on the doorstep. There's door knocking going on. There's phone canvassing going on, and it's interest that I get fascinated because I've been involved in all parts of it, of just how that whole mechanism happens. And from I was listening to a podcast the other day around, do the traditional campaigning methods justify the effort that's put into them, especially now with social media and things. So if you can imagine you're a door knocker, you're going out, you're canvassing on a doorstep. I always find it really, so from an HR perspective, I always find it interesting just how broken that system is. And I'll give you a few examples. Sure. You're walking along, and you might be somebody who doesn't really do much exercise, but when you get close to get close to election time, and you're on the campaign trail, you are walking every single day. If you're a candidate, you're generally in a suit because you want to look the part, or depending on what you're doing, you're wearing the wrong shoes because you need to be wearing trainers. You absolutely have to be wearing good footwear for the miles that you're doing, because you're probably somebody who normally doesn't do them sort of miles. So that's one thing. That making sure that you've got good footwear, good posture, all that sort of stuff, and you're doing things properly, because there's lots of bending over when you're doing that, because you're putting leaflets through people's doors, and things like that, which most people don't think about. But you get really good at understanding good designs of letterboxes. The ones that, can you push your hand through to get the leaflet all the way through? Does it scrunch up in the door and all that sort of stuff?
Right.
And one of the best tools that somebody told me, who was actually from an opposition party, was to go out with a kitchen spatula, and you wrap the leaflet around the kitchen spatula to push through the door, to make sure it lands. And that serves two purposes. One is it saves your knuckles, saves your fingers. And also, it saves you from being bitten by the dog at the other side of the door. So there's a bit of self-protection going on here. Because I've had it once and it was actually in a street that I used to live in. So this was in 2017, it must have been. I put my hand through the door to deliver a leaflet. Dog on the other side must have been there, nipped at my hand and drew blood. And I was like, that. I may have said one or two words that were not broadcastable. So then, but the next, you haven't got time to waste. So I'm sort of clutching my fingers in one hand, sort of going, holding that like that to sort of. So I'm like, okay, leaflet in the other hand. Next door, push that through. There's a dog behind that door as well, and it bites that hand. And so I'm literally standing outside going, is this actually possible that I've got both hands bitten within 2 doors? Having done that for a number of years, I'd never had a problem like it. So there is an element of how do you protect the hands of canvassers, people who are going leafleting and things like that, which I think is so. When somebody just said, the simple solution of kitchen spatula, you can use that to push through the doors. Then that's just fascinating. And then you get to things like what data are you collecting during the election campaign? Because a lot of people say you can knock on their doors and they're going, but you only come and talk to me election time, which is true largely. But you're not actually there to try and turn these people around to your vote. So they think they are. You give them a leaflet, you tell them a little bit of information, you'll answer the questions. But fundamentally, you're doing a long game of trying to work out what are they going to do on election day, and do you want to go and knock them up or not, and tell them to go and vote. Because if they're going to vote for your party, you absolutely want to know that they're going to vote. When do they intend on going to vote, and you will then go knock them up on the date to then get the vote. You set that whole operation in place. If they're going to vote for the opposition, then you put it into a database to make sure that nobody goes and knocks on them ever again before election day, because you don't want to remind them that there's an election on. You want to do all you can to keep them at home. And so that where people think that you're out there to knock on their door and convince them to vote your way, it's not actually really true. You're doing basically a 6-week campaign of understanding what you're going to do, the operation that you set up on election day itself, which I think a lot of people don't truly appreciate. That it's all a data harvesting exercise. And we talk a lot on this channel about the use of AI to do how we harvest data and how Google harvests data. That's nothing on the way that a political party would use your data to harvest your vote.
Can I just say I'm really jealous of your short election cycles, or at least this short election cycle. Ours feel like they drag on for years. It feels.
I guess when yours is coming.
Yeah, we do know when ours is coming, and so there's. I mean, I'm very politically active in terms of following politics, and I can't engage as much as I'd like to, but I'm following everything down to like these weird like county council seats in random counties in red states and blue states, and like basically looking at the margins to see where things have shifted since the last elections. And it's draining to have it like an always on type of thing, because the day after, at least in my area, we're what's considered like a purple area, where up until the 2020 cycle, or was it 22? I think it was 22. Up until 22, there was no. There was a Republican that was representing this area, and now there's a Democrat that's representing this area. And before that, I think even before that was so it's kind of shifted back and forth over time, and as county lines and district lines change with every census. And so the reason I bring that up is because the day after the 22 election, the opposition who ran for that position put up their signs saying 2024 will be here. And I'm just like, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to see it in your face all the time. And I can't imagine somebody who's maybe tuned out of politics, or what I would consider like a normal person a normal person who doesn't have the same sickness I have of like following every single election. Like election night is a okay, this is getting personal here. It's I was talking with my therapist and she thinks I may be addicted to election results.
I election day and election night in particular is
It's exhilarating.
It's brilliant. I mean, I'm a big fan of watching the stuff. I mean, again, yes, I'm a bit of a politics junkie and I've seen it from the outside, and I've been involved in it as well. So I've stood for most roles, most positions that you can, one way or another. And so I've been involved within campaigns and the centre of campaigns as well. So seeing how they sort of roll out I find fascinating, particularly when we talk about statistics and the way that people use statistics in the way that we try and calculate swing and what that sort of means. When I think it's really easy to forget that we're talking about people, and we hit that piece around because it invariably gets proven to be true as well, that you see how these swings happen, and you can really predict how people are going to vote given the certain set of events. And if you put the sort of things forward, it's just fascinating what you would not consider doing when we say run a trial or something like that and predict how an individual will react to a product or something like that. But you absolutely can apply it to crowd behavior when we're talking about how people are going to vote and react to certain things and in certain areas. The whole thing is just an absolute fascination and mashing together of statistics, people's attitudes, the whole stereotypes. And yet when somebody can cut through with something that's just completely random, and you're like, yeah, you've got it. That's absolutely amazing. For some in any time, so almost the most ridiculous reasons, but that work because they've come up with something different. Yet somebody else can try something different and it completely fall flat.
Mm-hmm.
I think you see the whole breadth of what's going on now. So from our perspective, yes, we've got a short election cycle. However, we've been in this cycle now probably most of this year because we have to have had an election by January next year anyway.
Right, so it's coming at some point.
So you know that as soon as you've had an election, the longest term you can have is 5 years. You have to call the general election within 5 years to make that happen. So we knew we had to have one because of the one in 2019. So yeah, that was a kind of there. What we expected, and again, it's in the gift of the Prime Minister to a certain extent, or quite a lot of extent, where they could, where they can choose when they have it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is it something where if things are going really well, and you think, right, well, now's the time to refresh the mandate, crack on, let's get another 5 years in the bag, or you're in kind of what's happened this time. There is two games being played. One is with the general public and the opposition, but also because the current Prime Minister had problems within his own party, that they were like, we're going to lose. When is the best time to lose? And some of the speculation discussion was around not what happens at this election, but at the next one, and how long will the current government be out of power? So there's people who think long and very, very long term in terms of this stuff, which is just fascinating. I think it's brilliant. Not everybody else has the same level of nerddom around this, I think, as what we do.
Oh my God. Well, and what's fascinating too is that like I don't know very many other Americans who follow international politics. I think when your election was called, I chatted you that day and I was like, oh, I'm excited.
It's but again, that was a really interesting day because there'd been rumors sort of circulating. So because nobody can ever keep a secret massively. So there's always a bit of leaking done, but nothing had been truly leaked. But we knew that the Prime Minister was going to give a speech, something like, I think it was 4:00 in the afternoon, which is a really weird time. Because if you're going to do something like that, you need to own the airwaves. Why leave a day's worth of speculation to then do what you do. So you're sitting there going, well, is this going to be something, or is it just going to be a speech that's a bit random? Then it starts to rain. And so typically what the Prime Minister would do would come out to a podium in Downing Street, so outside 10 Downing Street, into the street, to a podium and announce we're going to have a general election. It starts to rain. So he's then left to come out, address the public. And so then the first thing you know that something is happening is when the podium comes out. Because if he's talking and he's going to give a speech that is something to do with his role as Prime Minister, so something where he's representing the state, you have the podium that comes out and it has the crest on it. It has the seal, the equivalent to the seal of the Prime Minister of the country on it. But because he was calling a general election, therefore it's party political, he has a plain podium. And so as soon as that podium comes out, you're sat there going, he's called an election. He's calling an election. He's absolutely calling an election. But then weirdly, nobody gives him an umbrella. He comes and stands outside and nobody thinks, he's going to get soaked in his very, very expensive suit. And he clearly did. His sort of reasoning for it afterwards was, I didn't care about the rain. I was just doing this. But he just looked like a bit of, you could wring him out. You just wanted to wring his suit out afterwards because like, that must be soaking and cold. So then he calls this election, but it was a weird time to call it. He kind of should have called it earlier or later because summer elections are always a bit weird. So that entire day. So then there was the speculation around, right, he's called this. Why didn't anybody get him an umbrella? Literally, there was like news headlines around why did not one of his team or anybody like that say, let's have an umbrella or let's do it inside because it's raining. You're trying to plan to say that you can run the country and you can't even run an umbrella to your own thing. So that was weird. And then now we get into the debate cycles as well. So we've had 2 debates, which is 2 very different formats. And again, there's lots of discussion around what is the best format for a debate, about what is it the public want to see out of the debate to help them inform their vote. I'm largely, as much as I like to see them because there's a good bit of sparring going on, they are a complete waste of time when it comes to being able to make a decision on how you're going to vote. Personally, I think they don't do anybody any good unless you're a bully, basically. Anyway, that's kind of where we're at now. So we've got 3 weeks left. I'd be happy to have it tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see whether them polls narrow, what other activities happen between now and then, because all the manifestos have now been launched. I see everybody's dirty laundry is out there in public, everybody's claims and all that sort of thing. We've now just got a 3-week slog to before you can go and put the cross in the box.
I can't wait.
And the fun day.
What's absolutely funny to me is that it's on July 4th.
Yes.
And July 4th holds significance here in the States.
But it holds more significance for us now as well.
Yeah. No. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing. I'm taking work off that day because it's a holiday, but also because I am going to be following your elections. Because why not? I'm a junkie. I'm literally addicted to election results.
But you'll get it better as well because of the
time difference. Yeah.
Then I'm going to be weirdly, because normally I would definitely take election day off and go and campaign for my local candidate. Unfortunately, because of some things that have happened with a meeting that's landed on that day, I now can't do that. So, or at least I can't. I've got to do a certain amount of work. I will still go and do some campaigning. So we'll see what happens then. But then it's for me, certainly when I was a candidate, or I was more so when I was part of the campaign team, this is where spreadsheets come into play, because I always loved the count. The count itself was
the count.
Really care about the count, but I love going there. And what I managed, so what you do, for those who don't know, there's 2 stages to a count. Certainly there is 2 stages to count here in the UK. And that is verification and then counting. So the verification is all about, was the number of ballots that were cast at the polling station the same number of ballots as turned up in the counting centre? So all they do is they go through all of them, count, and make sure that if there was 2,000 votes cast in some school like 10 miles away, did all 2,000 of them votes make it to the count center? Fine, okay. So they do that. But what we then do, or what political parties do, is use that to sample the vote. Because then, as they're counting them, you can see how people have voted. And so, in my first couple of years of being involved, I was one of them sampling agents, and that was good fun. And you've got a little tally sheet, and you'd pick out sort of 10 votes, or however many it was, and you tally them up, go and take them to somebody who would pull them together. And what that does on the night is give you a warm, fuzzy feeling of whether you're winning or you're losing. But then a couple of years later, I sort of took this further into a bit of an art form. So I ended up having a spreadsheet. And I got people to tally up in a certain way. So then bring me the forms, I would put them in. And before the first vote was actually counted, I knew who'd won. And quite convincingly as well, because we got the tallies done. I taught people how to tally properly. Bring me the completed sheets. I put them into my spreadsheet that I'd pre-prepped, and it had all sorts of divisions, and it was brilliant. And I could look at my pie chart at the end of tallying, and sort of go, yep, I know whether we've won or lost. And it worked. And then afterwards, you could then use that data, which for me was the bit that we don't really do very well, but I try to, is then turn around and say, right, well, how does that affect my strategy for next year? Where was good, where was bad, where was indifferent? Because you get much higher level of detail than you do in the end vote. So because you learn about what different polling boxes do. So yeah, absolutely fascinating. And then you'd have people sort of asking you, how's it doing? How's it doing? I was like, I'm not telling you. We haven't had enough data to come in yet to give you a conclusive answer. Then there'd be a bridging point of I'd had maybe about, I don't know, 50% of the data in. Well, actually, it's looking a bit like this. And then you'd have like the regional office ringing you, asking you all this sort of stuff. Because I was at constituency. Brilliant fun. And then you'd be there until the bitter end, seeing if what I predicted came true, and it did. So I enjoyed that. The whole count night, and there's a lot of talk at the moment, certainly with the mayoral elections that just happened, about whether you should not count on the night but count the next day. And when you look at it from a human factors perspective, that's absolutely the right answer. You should not count when the polls close, because obviously everybody's had an all day of thing. The people who are counting will have probably been running polling stations. You're tired, fatigued, all that sort of stuff. You should let them go and get a rest, and you should start counting at 9 o'clock the next morning. But nobody wants that, because you want the answer, and you want
the answer now.
So yes, it'll be and then then you have like the different polling, the different districts competing against each other to see who can declare first, and so that's speed over quality and all that sort of stuff. There's a whole lot about it that is just brilliant.
Oh, I love this stuff. Like I think I told the story, right? So my wife, her birthday was on election night one year, and we went out to the middle of nowhere for her birthday to stay in a cabin in the woods, right? And like it was election night when we went out there. And I was like, I think this is when I talked about it with my therapist and realized I have an addiction to election night, because I was experiencing what I could only call a withdrawal symptoms of not having information, and thankfully found a spot that was like able to get internet connection out there. And so I stayed in that spot, and I kept refreshing. I couldn't get the things I normally have. Like I normally have like 3 or 4 monitors up of different news stations covering, and I have my phone, and I'm refreshing various feeds, and I'm like seeing what's going on and seeing all the new information. I didn't have that. What I had was the text feeds, which was like the whole oh I need more but it was a lesson learned for me that I will even if it's a birthday, I need to, for my own mental health, say we can just go the next day and it will be fine. Um, because the whole time, like, it was also like 4 or 5 hours away or something like that, and so it was election day, and we were driving the entire time when, like, we're on the West Coast, and so as soon as like 3 p.m. West Coast time, you start getting results from the East Coast because the polls in some places on the East Coast close at 6, which is super early. But then you can start inferring some things about the data that early, which is just like, so it's like 3 p.m. election day. You just start, it comes, and then it's just like hit after hit after hit. It's exhilarating. I'm describing my addiction here live on.
No, nothing. I mean, well, it's so important, isn't it? It's the sort of thing that we've kind of got into a psyche, and this is where we talk about like sort of social media and things like that as well. The way that, in fact, it's not just sort of, it's broader media, help us perpetuate a view around politics, because as soon as you start talking to people, it's that narrative of, certainly we get it over here, is well, they're all the same. It doesn't matter what color rosette they're wearing, they're all the same. And actually, that's just not true. There are so many individuals, there are so many people who are doing their thing, people who are involved in different ways, but it's almost that it's easier to have that common level of disgust of politicians are all the same. All politicians are in it for themselves. They're all committing fraud or doing some of that, and that's, well, certainly here in the UK, that's not true. The vast majority of politicians that I know are in it because they want to do what they consider to be the right thing. I mean, there's always exceptions to the rule, as there are all through society, but on the whole, I think most people are trying to do the right thing. But it's how we, it's this thing about how, as social media, how as the print media made us lazy in the way that we review and think about what we're doing. But equally, has also been said that in the same way that we talk about climate, that actually it's not necessarily that we want it to be somebody else's problem. It's just too big a problem for a lot of people to think about, because they're busy trying to make ends meet. They're trying to work out, have they got enough money in the bank on a Friday, rather than why do I care who runs the country? Somebody else is going to do that. That's somebody else's problem. I think it's
normies, normal people. That's what it's just like, people don't tune in. That's the thing for me, is like, it's exhausting for me when I talk about the election cycles here, because again, like, they're long and drawn out, but normal people, and I'm using that, like, normal people that are not addicted to politics in the same way that we are, will not tune in until, like, a month before the election, maybe. And that's when those decisions are made. And so that's why any polls that happen before that point are effectively useless. I mean, it gives you some insight, but the real tests happen to be like, we just had a special election in Ohio the other night where those are real data points because somebody was elected.
Yeah.
And what happened on Tuesday was you had a situation where it was a very red district. I think it went, it was like 30 points to the right. And team blue, team left, didn't, which I know we're opposite the world.
I was about to say, that's red an thing that
I know we're opposite the world. But basically they looked at it as like, okay, we're not going to win this one, but the thing to look at is the margins. And this 30% to the right, 30 point to the right county or area, the margin went from 30% to single digits.
Wow.
So it went
That's
20 points to the left. And so that is a more real data point than any poll.
yeah.
And it's the first. It was interesting because that was the first major. Well, it was the first special election since the news of the conviction, and so it kind of gives you some insight as to how people are perceiving national events happening, and that to me is fascinating too, and why I tune into those types of things, because how does news impact the way in these like hyper local elections that theoretically news like that should not impact because it did not have anything to do with any one of the candidates. But just to put it in perspective, is like the 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 Democrat in that situation was like somebody who worked at, I think he was a waiter. He quit his job and wanted to, and he only raised something like, I don't know the exact number. I think it was like $20,000. The Republican in there raised something like $75,000 and or $750,000 or something like that, just way over what the other guy made. And he had, I think has some government experience. So somebody with no experience versus somebody with experience, and the fact that it swang 20 points is really telling given the national environment right now. And so it's like those types of things are so fascinating to try to infer about what's going on. Like there's no reason for it to do that other than some of the things in the news.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because we've had as well some interesting things. So we in the Welsh government, for example. So obviously the UK, England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Wales has its own devolved government called the Senedd, and they had a thing. So they've just elected a new first minister about a couple of months ago. To replace, so still Labour, so the new Labour leader with a new first minister. Then it comes out that within his election campaign, he'd accepted a donation from a convicted criminal. So going back to the justice thing. Now, there was nothing illegal about that donation. There was nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Legally, that donation was absolutely above board in the way that it was delivered. There was nothing shady about it or anything like that. But then what was called into question was whether it was morally right he should have accepted that donation, which was really interesting because that then, because that was there in the media and then the general election was called, it was then being able to be used by the local opposition parties to call as a stick to beat Labour with, and they called it a vote of no confidence. And because two of his own party were sick, I've got my own thoughts around that. He lost the vote of no confidence, right? So normally you would expect that, right, you've lost a vote no confidence, they would have to resign because they've lost the confidence in the Senedd. But because it was a non-binding vote, then he hasn't had to, and he hasn't. And so you then get into a whole. Because he was somebody that I supported when we were voting for the leader. He was somebody that I supported. But then you get into, well, actually, if you can't command the authority of the Senedd, then should you be resigning? But then the way that this was all brought up was very actually he was kind of done over by his own party in I would say not in many ways, in a very singular way. So this was highlighted by one of his own ministers, or one of the ministers within the government who he then clearly isn't anymore. So he was kind of done over by his own team, to the wider embarrassment of the Labour Party. But how does that all fit in? And when we're talking about having trust in politics, whereas if you have a vote of no confidence in you, why is it non-binding? Why would you not be right? No, we need to get somebody else in. It's that whole wider piece of, are we doing the right thing? So, it's what a time to be alive, I think, is the
what a time
is the way to sum all
be
that
alive.
up.
And speaking of time, we've been here for an hour. I said
Wow.
we'd be here for an hour.
That was quick.
So it was a quick hour. Hopefully you liked our little rap about politics there. And then I guess we're here to make an appearance because we know it's been a while. We're all busy folks, and hopefully we can get back to some semblance of normalcy with regards to the schedule. I know, I'm sorry, but in the meantime, you had a wonderful episode with Heidi on the Safe Effective podcast. You and Kate, and that dropped recently. So if you're all wanting more Barry content, I'll encourage y'all to go over there. You also have your own podcast, 1202. What's been going on with 1202? Is there anything you want to plug?
We've just had a new episode drop today, this afternoon, with Sarah Pazel from Australia, where she is part of another podcast called the We Work podcast, which is not human factors specific, but it's all about how people work and things like that. And she has input into that. She's a human factors practitioner from the States, from Australia. And it was we had a really interesting discussion. So that dropped today. What's the most? And then we had one 3 weeks ago, dropped with Professor Phil Morgan from Cardiff University, where he does a lot of research into the future of human factors, the use of autonomy in driving and things like that. So we had a good chat then, and I've got, I think, 3 more in the bag. I recorded another one today that just to whet the appetite. I've gone on a slightly different tangent when I'm sort of looking at some organizations that HF could get involved with, so not necessarily HF people. So this one I did an interview around a trade organization called Aerospace Wales, which was interesting. And the person I interviewed, and I'll tease it a little bit without giving the name away, but when you're interviewing somebody or you chat to somebody and that conversation goes on an arc you didn't expect, this was completely one of them, where we started off with about Aerospace Wales itself, and then got chatting about her background, and we then started talk. We went on an arc from talking about transvestites to aerospace industry to Bridgerton here in the UK. I don't know if you've seen Bridgerton on Netflix.
Yeah,
period drama, bodice ripper type thing. So that was an arc I completely didn't expect in this interview, but it was a brilliant interview, and I need to master it, and that's going to go live in, I think, 4 to 6 weeks.
Amazing. All right. Well, in the meantime, if you want to connect with us, we're all over social media. You can also reach out to us directly via email, join our Discord. There's been actually some chatter in the Discord, despite our absence. Maybe people are trying to fill that void.
No.
So if you want to, reach out to us there. And we'll be back in probably a few weeks, or maybe next week. Who knows? We'll kind of see here with whatever we got going on. And thank you for joining us. I know this was a shorter stream, but thank you. And we just really appreciate y'all.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Well,
we'll see you next week.
That's it. All right.